From a future director working on secret matte paintings to a president with a hidden British backstory, John Carpenter's dystopian masterpiece hides some truly bizarre secrets. What if we told you the film's original master copy vanished for over 20 years? Or that the main character was named after a real high school bully? Between fake plane crashes that fooled newspapers and a future video game legend who nearly faced a lawsuit, the production was filled with enough strange incidents to rival the chaos of Manhattan prison itself. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Escape from New York, 1981. Fact 1. Snake Plissken was a real person. When John Carpenter was crafting the character of Snake Plissken for Escape from New York, he didn't need to look far for inspiration. The name came from someone very real and very memorable from Carpenter's own past, a tough guy from his high school days who left quite an impression on the future filmmaker. Snake Plissken was actually named after a real person that Carpenter knew during his teenage years, someone he described as a kinda high school tough guy who had all the intimidating qualities you'd expect from someone with that nickname. This wasn't just any ordinary classmate, this was someone who genuinely embodied the kind of dangerous, unpredictable personality that would later become the foundation for one of cinema's most iconic anti-heroes. What made this real-life snake even more perfect for inspiring a movie character was the fact that he had a snake tattoo, which Carpenter found absolutely fascinating. As the director later explained, "Anybody with a snake tattooed on them someplace, that's my kinda hero." The tattoo detail wasn't just a coincidence, it became a crucial part of the fictional Snake Plissken's character design, appearing prominently in the film as a serpent tattoo that winds around Kurt Russell's stomach and belly button area. Carpenter has admitted that this high school acquaintance was essentially a bully, someone who represented the kind of tough, rebellious figure that both intimidated and intrigued him during his formative years. The name was simply too perfect to pass up when he needed a moniker for his leather-clad, eye-patch-wearing protagonist who would navigate the dangerous streets of a post-apocalyptic Manhattan prison. This connection between the real Snake and the fictional one goes deeper than just a name and a tattoo. Carpenter channeled that sense of unpredictable danger and anti-establishment attitude that he remembered from his high school days, creating a character who operates outside the rules of normal society. The fact that Snake Plissken was born from Carpenter's actual memories of a real person adds an extra layer of authenticity to what became one of the most memorable action heroes of the 1980s. Fact 2. Jamie Lee Curtis provided secret narration. Hidden within the opening moments of Escape from New York is the voice of one of horror cinema's most recognizable stars, though most viewers would never know it. Jamie Lee Curtis, who had catapulted to fame just 3 years earlier as the final girl in John Carpenter's Halloween, provided both the opening narration that sets up the film's dystopian world and the computerized voice heard during Snake's first prison scene, all without receiving any credit in the film. This collaboration between Curtis and Carpenter happened during a period when the director was actively bringing together his favorite performers from previous projects. After Halloween became a massive success in 1978, Carpenter had built enough industry influence to attract bigger names and budgets for his follow-up films. Rather than abandoning the actors who had helped establish his reputation, he found creative ways to include them in new projects, even if their roles were smaller or unconventional. Curtis's contribution to Escape from New York represents a fascinating example of how voice work can completely transform an actor's presence in a film. While audiences were accustomed to seeing her face and hearing her natural speaking voice from Halloween, her work in Escape from New York required her to adopt an entirely different vocal approach. The opening narration needed to sound authoritative and somewhat cold, establishing the grim reality of a world where Manhattan had been converted into a maximum security prison, while the computer voice required a mechanical, emotionless delivery that would feel appropriately futuristic for the film's 1997 setting. The decision to leave Curtis uncredited for this work adds an element of mystery to her involvement, suggesting that this was likely a favor between collaborators rather than a traditional paid acting role. Her voice work helps establish the film's tone and world-building from the very first moments, making her an essential but invisible part of the Escape from New York experience that most fans discover only years later when diving into the film's production trivia. Fact 3. A president's son played Secret Service. In one of the most unusual casting choices in Escape from New York, the Secret Service agent desperately trying to break into the cockpit of the hijacked Air Force One was played by Stephen Ford, the actual son of former United States President Gerald Ford. This casting decision created a surreal layer of authenticity to the film's opening crisis, as a real president's son portrayed someone trying to save a fictional president from terrorists. Stephen Ford appears in the tense opening sequence where Air Force One has been taken over by anti-government insurgents who are deliberately crashing the plane into Manhattan. As the situation spirals out of control, Ford's character can be seen frantically attempting to regain access to the cockpit, desperately trying to stop the terrorists from completing their mission. The scene establishes the gravity of the crisis that will drive the entire plot. As the President of the United States becomes trapped in what has become the country's largest maximum security prison, the choice to cast Stephen Ford in this role wasn't just a random Hollywood connection or publicity stunt. Ford had been building a legitimate acting career during the late 1970s and early 1980s, appearing in various television shows and films. His casting in Escape from New York represented a continuation of his professional work, rather than a novelty appearance, though the irony of his real-world background certainly wasn't lost on the filmmakers or audiences who recognized him. This casting creates an almost meta-textual element to the film's commentary on American politics and authority. Here was the son of a man who had actually occupied the Oval Office, playing a federal agent trying to protect a fictional commander-in-chief in a movie that was deeply skeptical about government power and competence. Gerald Ford had left the presidency just 4 years before Escape from New York was released, making Stephen Ford's appearance particularly timely and adding an extra dimension to John Carpenter's cynical vision of a dystopian American future where the political system had completely broken down. Fact 4. The original film negative disappeared for 22 years. One of the strangest mysteries in film preservation history involves Escape from New York's original master negative, which completely vanished from MGM's archives and remained missing for over 2 decades. This disappearance prevented the studio from releasing any high-quality special edition versions of the cult classic, leaving fans with only lower-quality prints and transfers until the early 2000s. The original camera negative is the most important element for any film restoration project, containing the highest quality image and serving as the source for all future copies and remasters. Without access to this negative, MGM was essentially stuck with inferior materials that couldn't provide the sharp, clean image quality that modern audiences expected from special edition releases. This became increasingly frustrating as other classic films from the same era were receiving deluxe treatment with restored picture quality. Behind-the-scenes features and deleted scenes. The mystery was finally solved in 2003 when the missing workprint, which contained not only the original negative but also previously deleted scenes, was discovered in the most unlikely of places, a salt mine film depository located in Hutchinson, Kansas. These underground storage facilities, carved into natural salt formations, provide ideal conditions for long-term film preservation due to their stable temperature and humidity levels. However, the fact that such an important piece of cinema history had been sitting forgotten in a Kansas salt mine for over 20 years speaks to the chaotic nature of film storage and cataloging during that era. The recovered materials included extensive deleted scenes that had been cut from the original release, most notably an elaborate opening sequence showing Snake Plissken robbing a bank with a partner before being captured. Director John Carpenter had originally filmed this backstory to introduce the character, but test audiences found it confusing and it was removed from the final cut. When the workprint was finally recovered from the salt mine, these lost scenes could be included as special features, giving fans their first look at footage that had been considered permanently lost to cinema history. Fact 5. James Cameron painted the future before Terminator. Long before James Cameron became known as the visionary director behind Titanic and Avatar, he was working as a 26-year-old special effects artist for Roger Corman's low-budget New World Pictures, where he spent his days creating matte paintings and visual effects for films that had tiny budgets but big ambitions. One of his most significant early projects was Escape from New York, where he served as both a matte artist and director of photography for special visual effects, helping to create the convincing dystopian New York skyline that audiences see throughout the film. Cameron's job involved creating detailed glass paintings that would be positioned in front of the camera to extend sets and create backgrounds that the production couldn't afford to build or film on location. For Escape from New York, this meant painting realistic New York City skylines that would make audiences believe Snake Plissken was really navigating through a post-apocalyptic Manhattan, even though most of the filming actually took place in St. Louis, Missouri. These matte paintings were crucial for establishing the film's visual credibility, as they provided the iconic urban backdrop that made the prison city concept feel authentic and threatening. John Carpenter later praised Cameron's work on the film, noting that the young artist was already demonstrating the technical innovation and attention to detail that would later make him one of Hollywood's most successful filmmakers. Cameron's contributions went beyond just painting backgrounds. He also worked on the film's computer graphics sequences, including the wireframe animations that appear on Snake's glider control panel as he approaches the World Trade Center landing site. This early collaboration between Cameron and Carpenter happened 3 years before Cameron would direct The Terminator in 1984, which launched his career as a major filmmaker. The experience working on Escape from New York gave Cameron valuable hands-on training in visual effects and filmmaking techniques that he would later apply to his own projects. His work on this cult classic represents an important stepping stone in the career of someone who would eventually revolutionize cinema with groundbreaking special effects in films like Aliens, The Abyss, and Terminator 2. Fact 6. A fake plane crash fooled newspapers. One of the most elaborate practical effects in Escape from New York accidentally created a real-world hoax that completely fooled local newspapers and the general public. The production team needed to create a convincing airplane crash site for the scene where Air Force One goes down in Manhattan, but instead of building a fake wreckage from scratch, they purchased an actual decommissioned aircraft and transported it to their filming location in the most dramatic way possible. The crew bought a junked plane that was still in one piece and then cut it into several large sections so they could truck it through the city streets during the nighttime hours when traffic was minimal. Working under cover of darkness, they carefully positioned these airplane pieces at their chosen filming location, arranging them to look like the aftermath of a catastrophic crash. The setup was so realistic and convincing that when morning came and people discovered what appeared to be plane wreckage scattered across the area, they naturally assumed they were looking at the scene of a real disaster. What happened next demonstrates just how believable the movie crew's handiwork really was. Local newspapers began running stories about the plane crash, complete with photographs of the wreckage and detailed reporting about the incident. Even more remarkably, the papers included eyewitness accounts from people who claimed they had seen the aircraft go down, describing in vivid detail how they had witnessed the crash happen. These eyewitness testimonies were completely fabricated, as no plane had actually crashed. People were simply seeing the movie set and allowing their imaginations to fill in a dramatic backstory. The incident reveals both the impressive craftsmanship of the Escape from New York production team and the power of suggestion when people encounter something unexpected. The fake crash site was so meticulously arranged and authentic-looking that it triggered a chain reaction of false memories and invented stories. By the time anyone realized that the wreckage was actually a movie prop, the fictional plane crash had already become part of the local news cycle, creating a brief moment where John Carpenter's dystopian movie temporarily invaded real life. Fact 7. Donald Pleasance created a British colony backstory. When British actor Donald Pleasance was cast as the President of the United States in Escape from New York, he faced an obvious challenge that neither John Carpenter nor the script addressed: how to explain why an American president would speak with a distinctly British accent. Rather than simply ignoring this potential plot hole or attempting to disguise his natural speaking voice, Pleasance took it upon himself to create an elaborate fictional backstory that would justify his character's unexpected accent within the film's dystopian world. Pleasance's self-invented backstory involved British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and a dramatic political scenario where the United States had somehow reverted to being a British colony by the time the film's events take place in 1997. This creative explanation would have provided a logical reason for why the American president sounded British, suggesting that the political landscape had shifted so dramatically that Britain had regained control over its former colonial territory. The backstory demonstrated Pleasance's commitment to his craft and his desire to make his character feel authentic within the film's established universe. However, when Pleasance presented this detailed backstory to director John Carpenter, the filmmaker made the decision not to incorporate it into the script or have it explained in the film. Carpenter apparently preferred to leave the president's accent as an unexplained element, allowing audiences to accept it without needing a specific justification. This choice fits with the film's overall approach to world building, which often presents strange or unusual details without extensive exposition, trusting viewers to go along with the dystopian reality that's been established. The unused backstory reveals Pleasance's thorough approach to character development, even when playing a relatively small role in what was essentially an action film. His willingness to create this political scenario shows how seriously he took the part, despite the fact that the president serves primarily as a plot device to drive Snake Plissken's mission forward. The Margaret Thatcher connection also reflects the political climate of the early 1980s, when the British Prime Minister was a dominant figure in international politics and Anglo-American relations. Fact 8. Kurt Russell hit a real wrestler with a spiked bat. When John Carpenter needed someone to play Slag, the massive gladiator-style opponent that Snake Plissken faces in the underground fighting arena, he decided to cast an actual professional wrestler named Ox Baker, who was known for his intimidating presence and genuine toughness in the ring. This casting choice seemed perfect for creating an authentic and menacing fight scene, but it quickly became clear that Baker brought all of his real wrestling intensity to the movie set, making the filming process much more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. During the rehearsal sessions leading up to the actual filming, Ox Baker approached the fight choreography with the same aggressive energy he used in professional wrestling matches. He was so physical and rough during these practice runs that Kurt Russell's stuntman, who was supposed to help coordinate the safe execution of the fight, could only offer Russell one piece of advice when it came time to film the real scene. Good luck. This response from an experienced stuntman, who had seen countless action sequences, spoke volumes about just how unpredictable and intense Baker could be during physical confrontations. The climax of their gladiator battle required Russell to deliver what appeared to be a fatal blow to Baker's character using a baseball bat that had been modified with protruding nails to make it look like a medieval weapon. Rather than using movie magic or special effects to fake this moment, the production team decided that Russell would actually strike Baker in the back of the neck with the spiked bat. To protect the wrestler from serious injury, they attached a piece of padding to Baker's neck that would absorb the impact. But both Russell and Carpenter later recalled that Baker seemed visibly nervous about the stunt. Russell himself described the entire filming experience as nightmarish, explaining that the scene required him to repeatedly swing the dangerous-looking weapon at Baker while also defending himself from the wrestler's aggressive attacks. According to Russell, Baker threw a trash can directly at his face approximately 5 times during the sequence, and the actor admitted that he could have ended up seriously injured if things had gone wrong during their brutal on-screen confrontation. Fact 9. Metal Gear's creator nearly got sued. The beloved Metal Gear Solid video game series came dangerously close to being the target of a major copyright lawsuit, and it was only saved by John Carpenter's personal fondness for the game's creator, Hideo Kojima. The similarities between Snake Plissken from Escape from New York and Solid Snake from the Metal Gear games were so obvious that Canal Plus Group, the company that owned the rights to Carpenter's film, seriously considered taking legal action against the video game franchise for what they saw as blatant copying of their intellectual property. The parallels between the two characters are indeed striking and go far beyond just sharing the name Snake. Both protagonists wear eye patches, sport similar mullet hairstyles and 5 o'clock shadow facial hair, and speak with the same kind of gruff, world-weary voice. The games even included a more direct reference to Escape from New York in Metal Gear Solid 2, where the main character uses the alias Iroquois Pliskin for most of the game, directly referencing Kurt Russell's character from the film. Kojima had never hidden his admiration for Carpenter's movie, openly stating that Escape from New York was the movie that influenced me the most in the birth of Metal Gear Solid hero Solid Snake. When Canal Plus Group began exploring the possibility of legal action against the video game series, they had already successfully sued French filmmaker Luc Besson over his movie Lockout, which they claimed plagiarized Escape from New York. With that victory behind them, the company was prepared to pursue another case against what they considered another clear example of copying their property. However, their plans were stopped by an unexpected intervention from John Carpenter himself, who instructed the company not to pursue the lawsuit. Carpenter's reasoning was refreshingly straightforward and personal. As he explained to reporters, "I know the director of those games, and he's a nice guy, or at least he's nice to me." This simple assessment of Kojima's character was enough to convince Carpenter to protect the game creator from what could have been a devastating legal battle that might have seriously damaged or even ended the Metal Gear franchise before it reached its full potential. Fact 10. Kurt Russell's wife played the doomed girl. One of the most tragic moments in Escape from New York occurs when Snake Plissken encounters a young woman in an abandoned chock-full-of-nuts diner, only to watch helplessly as she's dragged away and killed by the violent inmates known as crazies. This brief but memorable character was played by seasoned Hubley, who happened to be married to Kurt Russell at the time of filming, creating an unusual situation where a real-life husband and wife were playing characters who meet under the most dire circumstances imaginable. Russell and Hubley's relationship had begun during the production of John Carpenter's previous film, a television movie about Elvis Presley that aired in 1979. In that biographical drama, Russell played the king of rock and roll, while Hubley portrayed Priscilla Presley, allowing them to explore the famous couple's romance both on screen and off. Their professional collaboration blossomed into a real romance, and by the time Escape from New York went into production, they had become husband and wife in real life. The casting of Hubley in Escape from New York represents another example of John Carpenter's tendency to work repeatedly with actors he trusted and enjoyed collaborating with. Rather than holding extensive auditions for the small but important role of the diner girl, Carpenter was able to cast someone he already knew could deliver a compelling performance while also doing a favor for his leading man by giving Russell's wife a part in the film. The scene itself is particularly haunting because it shows one of the few moments in the film where Snake Plissken appears to genuinely care about another person's welfare. When the crazies attack the diner and drag Hubley's character away, Snake is forced to choose between trying to save her and continuing his mission to rescue the president. The fact that Russell was watching his real-life wife being menaced and killed by the film's villains adds an extra layer of intensity to his performance, as his character's helplessness and frustration may have reflected some genuine emotions about watching someone he loved in danger, even in a fictional context. Fact 11. Russell's dimple became a scar. Kurt Russell's natural facial features presented an unexpected challenge when it came to creating the menacing appearance that Snake Plissken required, leading the makeup and wardrobe departments to make a creative decision that would become one of the character's most distinctive visual elements. Russell has a prominent dimple on his cheek that becomes especially noticeable when he smiles or makes certain facial expressions. But this charming feature didn't fit with the grim, battle-hardened persona that John Carpenter wanted for his post-apocalyptic anti-hero. The problem was that dimples are typically associated with warmth, friendliness, and approachability qualities that would completely undermine Snake Plissken's intimidating presence as a dangerous ex-soldier turned criminal. The character needed to look like someone who had survived brutal combat situations and lived a hard life on the wrong side of the law, not someone whose face would light up with an endearing dimple whenever he showed any emotion. The wardrobe department realized that Russell's natural dimple could potentially make audiences see Snake as more likable and less threatening than the script required. Their solution was both simple and effective. They decided to place a fake scar directly over Russell's dimple, transforming what would have been a charming facial feature into evidence of past violence and hardship. This makeup choice served a dual purpose, as it not only covered up the dimple but actually enhanced Snake's backstory by suggesting he had been injured in combat or during one of his criminal activities. The scar became a visual shorthand for the character's dangerous past and his willingness to engage in violent confrontations. The artificial scar is most visible in scenes where Russell is confronting Bob Houck about the explosive devices that have been injected into Snake's neck, creating a tense moment where the character's scarred face emphasizes his defiant attitude toward authority. This attention to detail in character design shows how even the smallest physical features can impact how audiences perceive a character and how makeup artists must sometimes work against an actor's natural appearance to serve the story's needs. Fact 12. Russell couldn't convince theaters he was in the movie. When Kurt Russell wanted to see Escape from New York with his family during the film's initial theatrical run, he encountered one of the most embarrassing situations any movie star could face. The theater owner simply refused to believe that Russell was actually the lead actor in the film that was playing on his screens. This awkward confrontation happened when Russell was visiting New York City with his family and decided it would be fun to watch his latest movie with his loved ones in the very city where the story takes place. Russell approached the theater owner and tried to explain that he was Kurt Russell, the actor who played Snake Plissken in the movie they were about to watch, hoping to arrange complimentary tickets for himself and his family members. However, the theater owner was completely unconvinced by Russell's claims and apparently saw no resemblance between the clean-shaven, well-dressed man standing in front of him and the gritty, long-haired, eye-patch-wearing character that dominated the movie's promotional materials and appeared throughout the film. The situation became increasingly uncomfortable as Russell tried various ways to prove his identity, but the theater owner remained skeptical and refused to provide free admission for what he assumed was just another person trying to scam their way into a movie. The transformation that Russell had undergone for the role of Snake Plissken was so complete, with his distinctive mullet haircut, scruffy facial hair, leather outfit, and intimidating eye patch, that his normal appearance was virtually unrecognizable compared to his on-screen persona. Ultimately, Russell gave up trying to convince the theater owner of his identity and simply purchased tickets for himself and all 7 of his family members, paying full price to see his own movie. This incident highlights how dramatically actors can transform their appearance for roles, sometimes to the point where their real-life appearance bears little resemblance to their characters. It also demonstrates the somewhat humbling reality that even movie stars sometimes have to deal with skeptical strangers who don't recognize them when they're not in costume and character. Fact 13. Characters named after horror directors. Throughout Escape from New York, John Carpenter included several subtle tributes to his fellow filmmakers by naming minor characters after directors who had influenced his work or earned his respect in the science fiction and horror genres. This practice of embedding references to other creators within his films became one of Carpenter's signature touches, allowing him to pay homage to the cinematic community while adding insider knowledge that keen-eyed viewers could discover and appreciate. The most prominent of these character names is Cronenberg, which references David Cronenberg, the Canadian director who became famous for his disturbing body horror films like The Brood, Scanners, and Videodrome. Cronenberg was establishing himself as a master of psychological and physical horror during the same period when Carpenter was building his own reputation, making this tribute particularly meaningful as a recognition between contemporary filmmakers who were both pushing the boundaries of genre cinema in their own distinctive ways. Another character name that appears in the film is Romero, honoring George A. Romero, the legendary director who revolutionized zombie movies with Night of the Living Dead and its sequels. Romero's influence on horror cinema was enormous, and his independent approach to filmmaking shared similarities with Carpenter's own methods of creating effective genre films on modest budgets. The inclusion of Romero's name demonstrates Carpenter's appreciation for a director who had proven that innovative storytelling and atmosphere could overcome financial limitations. The third directorial tribute comes in the form of a character named Taylor, though the specific filmmaker being referenced remains unclear from available production information. This naming pattern reflects Carpenter's deep connection to the genre film community and his desire to acknowledge the work of directors who had paved the way for his own career. These character names function as a form of cinematic inside joke, creating a layer of meaning that genre fans could appreciate while never interfering with the story for general audiences who might not catch the references. The practice also demonstrates how Carpenter viewed filmmaking as a collaborative art form where directors could learn from and honor each other's contributions to cinema. Fact 14. Carpenter performed as street musician. John Carpenter made not one but 2 personal appearances in Escape from New York, stepping in front of the camera to play small but memorable roles that allowed him to become part of the dystopian world he had created. The most notable of these cameos occurs during the prison Broadway scene, where Carpenter himself can be seen playing the violin as one of the street musicians performing in the makeshift entertainment district that the inmates have established within the walls of Manhattan Prison. This violin-playing cameo takes place during one of the film's most atmospheric sequences, as Snake Plissken makes his way through the bizarre nightlife that has developed in the post-apocalyptic city. The Broadway area serves as a twisted version of New York's famous theater district, where prisoners have created their own forms of entertainment and commerce in the absence of any official authority. Carpenter's decision to personally perform as a musician in this scene adds an authentic touch to the sequence, as his actual violin playing contributes to the eerie, carnival-like atmosphere that makes this part of the film so memorable. Carpenter's second appearance in the film is much more subtle and occurs during the helicopter rescue sequence near the end of the movie. As the aircraft arrives to retrieve the president's briefcase containing the important nuclear fusion tape, Carpenter can be heard as one of the helicopter crew members pointing down and saying, "People down in the park, can you see them?" This brief vocal cameo places the director literally in the middle of the action during one of the film's most crucial moments, as the rescue operation represents the climax of Snake's mission. These dual appearances reflect Carpenter's hands-on approach to filmmaking and his willingness to contribute wherever needed to make his vision come to life. The violin cameo demonstrates his musical abilities, which would become increasingly important throughout his career as he composed memorable synthesizer scores for many of his films. Both cameos also show Carpenter's playful side and his desire to be personally invested in every aspect of his productions, from behind-the-camera direction to on-screen performance. Fact 15. Self-lighting cigarettes burned Russell's fingers. When the production team for Escape from New York sat down to brainstorm futuristic props that would help establish the film's 1997 setting, they came up with numerous creative ideas designed to make the world feel appropriately advanced compared to 1981 technology. One concept that particularly excited the crew was the idea of self-lighting cigarettes, which seemed like exactly the kind of convenient future innovation that would fit perfectly with Snake Plissken's cool, effortless character while adding a subtle science fiction element to his smoking habit. The concept behind these futuristic cigarettes was simple in theory. They would somehow ignite themselves without requiring a lighter or matches, allowing Snake to light up with a casual gesture that would look impressive on camera while reinforcing the film's future setting. The crew imagined that this small detail would be one of many technological advances that would help audiences believe they were watching events that took place 16 years in the future, when such conveniences might actually exist. However, translating this idea from concept to working prop proved to be far more challenging and dangerous than anyone had anticipated. The special effects team made multiple attempts to create cigarettes that would reliably ignite themselves on cue during filming, but every single test resulted in the same painful outcome: Kurt Russell getting his fingers burned by the unpredictable ignition mechanism. Rather than creating the smooth, effortless lighting effect they had envisioned, the experimental cigarettes became tiny fire hazards that posed a real threat to the star's safety. Despite several different approaches to solving the technical problems, the crew never managed to create a version of the self-lighting cigarettes that worked safely and consistently enough for actual filming. The repeated failures and injuries eventually forced them to abandon the idea entirely, leaving Russell to light his cigarettes the old-fashioned way throughout the film. This behind-the-scenes struggle demonstrates how even seemingly simple futuristic props can present unexpected challenges, and how practical effects work sometimes requires accepting limitations rather than pursuing dangerous solutions that could harm the actors.